If you haven't checked out the LinkedIn news of late, you may have missed some of my comments around some of the big ideas for 2021. One of the ones that I'm very passionate about in particular is this new paradigm of leadership. I mean, what am I talking about? Well, throwing out our views that, leadership comes when you have a certain role or a title, climbing the corporate ladder for 20 years, and then all of a sudden you get to a position where you say, oh, I'm a leader now. Well, that's, in my opinion, something that is now gone. I know it's some time before we kind of change things that need to shift around that perspective. But ultimately what I'm looking at is for human beings individually to experience themselves and have the opportunity to express their passion and their purpose for life and to stand out and have the experience of being a leader, no matter whether they have the title or not. So it was really fitting for me at the end of last year, being acknowledged as LinkedIn's top 2020 voice, to reach out to some of the extraordinary humans who were, like myself, stood out last year for taking a stand on their perspectives and their views. And one of them happened to be the remarkable Brian Walker, who's the CEO and founder of the Retail Doctor. And so I'm really thrilled that he said yes, because today we are going to get stuck into the topic of leadership, specifically in this area of a new paradigm. And there were a few things that Brian mentioned to me that I thought would be particularly valuable to talk about today. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a snapshot on what some of those things are. Because as we go into this year, it could be easy to be really hopeful and optimistic about the year ahead, especially coming out of what we did last year. But, being optimistic's one level. Once you've got the optimism and a view about what you're committed to, it does take a lot of hard work. And I quite like the analogy of the doctor approach because, not only do we need a doctor when it comes to our health, but we certainly do need a doctor when it comes to our business. But some of the things that we're going to talk with Brian about today, what it looks like to be fit for business, the importance of branding, and in the area of leadership, what is it to lead and be a great leader? Brian is in particular passion around the distinctions of curiosity and trust and how that plays into brand. So, Brian, thank you so much for joining me today. I really want to get stuck into how you, particularly your story, right? Because the Retail Doctor is a fabulous analogy. And as I heard, when I saw the title of your business, I was like, oh, what a great name. How did that happen for you?
Hi, Kylie. Great to be here. Well, the Retail Doctor has been one of those brands that really gives people a strong sense of what it is we do. And in the past lives, I've tried other brands, I suppose, that haven't been as profound in getting to the heart of it, if you like. Really, the business of Retail Doctor came about because I personally had a background in retailing, as you would hope, franchising, running shopping centres and one thing or another. At a point in time, 15 years ago, I observed as a line manager that there were lots of consultants coming to work or advisors who were very good at the what to do, but I'd grown up in the how to do it. And so really I built these early business fitness modules all around the how to do it, and started quite by accident, but ultimately into the generation of the trademark and the name, if you like, by working with retailers who had a strategy, and then I was busily helping them implement to deploy it. And that was the real core skill of the how to do it. And then that's built out into an insight strategy implementation business. We work globally, predominantly domestically, and there's a range of networks we have around the world. But the point is that Retail Doctor has always been a business that's been about insights-driven implementation. Mm. And we have the diagnostic. So we diagnose before we prescribe, like a good doctor.
Like a good doctor does, yes. I do want to mention that, before you and I went live, you were telling me about the story of what happened when you first reached out to somebody to get this started. And I am particularly interested in that because for anyone who's either in business or even those who have particularly, thought about starting a business, that, sometimes there's a bit of an illusion about, how much planning or what goes into having it happen. And you want to just share with us, I think, the transition or where you were at and the gap and then what happened. Yeah.
I'd finished a role as a general manager of retail nationally. and I was sitting in a cafe, and I got a call from a retailer. He said, I'd heard about you, and here's our business in Australia. Could you come and have a look? And I did. And I said, came back and said, oh, this is pretty straightforward to fix this issue you're talking about. Just do this, 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 and this, in this order with these people at this time. And I'll even hang around and help you for a little while. And we did that. And a couple of months later, I'm sitting at a similar cafe. I obviously spent a lot of time in cafes in those days.
Yes.
And I was talking to a friend and describing, and he said, oh, it's a bit like being a doctor, isn't it? This sort of, let me discover first. And really, I started thinking, oh, retail doctor. So straight away, literally, I caught a ferry, as I recall, because I live in Sydney's Northern Beaches, a ferry across to the city, registered retail doctor. There was one overseas, registered that, and then took a desk at a friend's advertising firm. Because I wasn't my best company working by myself. I'd always want to sort of, raid the cookie jar or what have you. And I needed this idea of people around, I suppose, because emulating that office environment. And then I started to build out a very crude early diagnostic of what I would look at when I visited a business. And it was this classic piece of strategy, brand, people, environment, visual. And those days, of course, we didn't have online, physical, customer connection, and so forth. And then I modularized all that, okay, and branded those names as well. And so built the very early generation of productizing a core offer at one level, and then bespoke around the whole packaging of it, if you like, and the circumstance of it. And then I just worked bloody hard. There's just no other way of saying it. It was 90-hour weeks. One of the things I did, I went back to my network at the time in the early days, and I'm grateful to some of these people. And I said, I've got this idea. Can I test it in your business? And I'm going to charge you ridiculously low rates. But if you like the work, you're going to agree to helping me build my treasure chest. And the second person I ever employed was a marketing manager. I valued brand, creating a uniqueness of offer, creating a position in the market, if you like, far more than administration, with great respect to all administrators out there. That came along as well. So that's how it really all started. And I can remember many times face planting into keyboards at 1 or 2 in the morning.
Of course, I'm laughing because, it resonates, right? I mean, anyone who has started a business knows exactly what you're talking about. I think, we get out there kind of all passionate about what's going to happen, but because we are so passionate, in fact, it's probably a good question, Brian, did it occur to you like that was the case? Because I certainly know from my perspective, there have been times where I have just worked around the clock, but it doesn't occur to me like it's like a lot of hours because it just is something I'm deeply passionate about.
I think in the early days, and I agree, Kyle, in the early days, and it's still true today, I had a bit of a thing in me that was good work and network was this sort of phrase in my mind. Do great work. If you can't do great work, don't start it. And build networks, build relationships. People, and I'm fiercely protective of the brand and always have been. Sometimes that's landed me in a bit of bother. But overall, it's always been about make sure, number one rule, if we're doing what we do, you have to be able to see what's going on, see the moving parts, know you can add value, or your colleagues can add value as we grow, and that the client recognizes the value and then do whatever it takes to deliver it.
So let's talk about the thing that you do say that it's very, very important to you, which is brand. When it comes to that for you, like what does that mean and look like for you?
Ultimately, it means and looks like that if anyone in our market, our audience, our community wants a specialist to work with that they can trust, that they will think of us in the selection process, in the choice set. It means that people clearly know what we're about. And it also means that we have the ability over time and time to come to um, create a value in a brand that makes the business ultimately saleable or of a value. But my intent now is that it doesn't. And brand is a very big part of that.
Yeah. And, I think sometimes, unless you work in the area of brand, which, as you know, having come from a background as a marketer, that brand is essential. And in fact, I've been applying the discipline of brand into the area of leadership because, it was about 6 months ago, I was working with a client and we were working on, leadership specifically, how for her to express and advance as a leader. And there was a very interesting turning point when I said to her, what if I said to you that you were a brand? If we treated you as a brand as opposed to you as an individual, what difference do you think it would make any difference? And it blew my mind because when she all of a sudden looked at herself from that perspective, she found it very easy to see how, well, if she defined herself, because you just brought up the thing about values, right? So the very thing that she identified with when it comes to brand is that brands have a very clear statement about their values or what they represent. And so when she put the spotlight on herself as a brand, she was very able to see, when it's very obvious that she was operating consistent with that brand or not, right?
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
when you don't look at yourself like that and you just kind of operate, you just kind of flow.
It's very true. And I'd like to think of the personality of our brand very much in that trusted, and people say this, but this trusted advisor. Who do I turn to for counsel and to help me on the journey? And so all the attributes emotionally that sit with that is what we think of in brand. And you're right to talk to your friend about personality of brand and character of brand, because there needs to be a clear alignment.
And how do you deal with that in your business? So how many staff, and so what's the nature of your business size like and scope?
We're still only 10 core employees,
Mm-hmm.
but we've got a wide range of network of subcontractors and subject matter experts who do get involved with projects depending on what's required. But they are sort of they're really handpicked, and they're very consistent with our brand values. And some of them I've touched on today. And invariably, they come under not because it's our reputation. I had found in the early days, once or twice, you get someone else in with great respect to them. No one loves your brand like you.
Mm.
So part of our internal mantra and discipline is around brand guidelines, brand content, brand values, and so forth. And we look for really explicit examples of that in our partners. So we have an insights area. We have a general manager who runs that, and she's an exceptional exponent of this thing called brand. And we have other people who are also exceptional exponents. So we have operations consultants in the implementation division, strategy I tend to get more involved with, insights I've touched on. And then we've put a lot of products for our implementation online. We've got a wonderful person leading and running that. And so that's our core team. We're about to start licensing in this coming year as such. So that'll be another part of the puzzle and the journey as we grow. And we've got a wonderful advisory board, by the way, and that's chaired by Dominic Lamb, the CEO of the National Retailers. Very astute and very focused on helping us, which is brilliant. And I've always believed that every good coach needs a coach. So that's been a part of this as well. I've always had a few people that have changed over the years whose counsel I've sought.
Yeah. Well, perfect segue, because when we first started speaking, you were talking about, your views on leadership and specifically around students, leaders being students. So, I'm just kind of interested about, were you saying that because, every coach should have a great coach, and your views on being a leader and the relationship between, a leader as a student.
We recently went to interview for a person to join us. And we got down to the couple of final people, and this will kind of make the point. And it was very obvious to me that this person could do the job we'd asked. And then I asked, so what do you read? And it was obvious this person didn't read and didn't spend a lot of time investing in themselves. And so that kind of blew it for them, to be candid. But what it really demonstrated for me was that we live in this incredibly fast changing world, and you don't need me to comment on how quickly people, knowledge changes. But I will say one thing, when I was out getting business degrees and like many years ago, the knowledge passport was something like 30 years. Well, now it's deemed to be 3 years. And in 5 more years, it'll be deemed to be 18 months. In other words, this concept of knowledge, is changing. So what does that mean in terms of leaders? Well, if I talk about the leaders that we've had the great pleasure of knowing and working with, and will continue to do so, there's some commonalities about them. One is they are curious. That is that they're always thinking, is there a better way to do this? 2, they are absolute consumption addicts of content around the future, around what's going on, and hence why LinkedIn and the Top Voices piece has been so invaluable, because content's out there, but it's our ability to interpret that. I think the other thing around the leadership piece is that they invariably lead from the outside in. So by that I mean they're leaders that, and I'd like to think we're like this as well, they can look back and come back in. And that's a really increasingly important part. They stay the course. That's critical.
We often say that a lot, right? I just want to unpack that. When we say stay the course, what are you referring to?
Oh, a lot of people would call it resilience, I think.
Right.
The hallmark of a leadership, in my view, is
right.
that they may have no one report to them. They may be a startup. They may be running a multinational. They stay the course. They've got all these fluctuations and distractions and setbacks and challenges, and they still stay on it.
Yes.
They've got a relentless focus. They have a pretty solid and healthy self-belief system. And by the way, I am projecting myself into some aspects of this.
I was just about to say that.
I'm guilty as charged, but I am, because
this is why it's perfect, right? And often even asking people, at the end of my interviews with people, I've always asked, for people to complete the sentence about, their version of a leader, right? And inevitably that which we speak is very close to our own hearts, because it's what we see and what we do, live and breathe. So I'm really glad you made that point. I think the thing about knowledge, I am interested, just to touch on one of those things. I mean, so the first one you said really was about being curious, and which we have to be in a world like today, right? But that is very strongly connected, I think, to the second point you raised, which is about knowledge. And I do think it's important to talk about that, because you spot on, the timing in which knowledge exists has certainly got cut to pieces. But I am also interested in this kind of paradox, right? Because, when I got I got my first leadership role when I was 27. I had a very early start. I was a very hard worker. I worked very solidly, and, was fortunately. Yeah, well, nothing really changes. But look, it really didn't hit kind of the leadership thing. I would say I didn't really experience myself in terms of a decent role as a leader for another 6 years, I'd say, so in my early 30s. But the irony of it was, right, like it was 20 years ultimately before I was really at the peak of my development as a leader and being a leader, right? But the funny thing that happened for me is I really had thought, I had these expectations on myself that once you get to a certain point, some shit, I should know what I'm doing by now. And the biggest miracle that ever happened for me in terms of my experience of freedom as a leader was when I actually finally went, you know what? I don't know. I actually do not know yet. And I had to finish it with a yet. Because don't you think, I think as leaders, when one has a number of years of experience, there's kind of a paradoxical view that we do think we have to have it together. Well, we have to have the answers. I mean, do you find that yourself? I mean, what's your view?
How much time do we have today, Kylie? What a fascinating topic. Well, let me sort of make a couple of quick comments, if I may. the experience you've described and where I see great leaders is that leadership is a reflected state in that sense. In other words, we've got to have a pretty good sense of self. We've got to have a degree of humility, which you've touched on, the vulnerability of not knowing and being okay to say that. We've got to worry less about the formality of position and more about the influence of role or person. So I think that great leaders have this developing belief system. Now, you know, we've had leadership positions in our 20s, but really, ultimately, they're management positions with great respect. Mm-hmm. You know, and then they evolve. The art of leadership will start to play in. And we're always prepared and want to learn. I think that's the key to this. The other thing I'd say about leaders too is that the really good ones tend to have a little bit of an X factor. And that's the intangible piece. And they're great at relationships. So when I think about the best projects we've ever done, the person who's worked with us has never seen us being there for less than 12 months. They've always realized it was a 2 or 3 year or 4 year journey, and they are intrinsically invested into the journey, the journey of change. They recognize that. The more transactional exponents see it as a destination within 6 months or 12 months. And life doesn't quite work out that way in many cases. And often what we find historically is that we've repaired something, but we haven't built something. The building comes with trust and rapport and relationship. And that takes that self-belief system to work.
Yeah. So given that you mentioned X Factor, I'm going to put the spotlight on for you to reflect back on last year, right? So getting to the end of the year and then being acknowledged as one of LinkedIn's top 20 voices. And if I was to apply your theory then about there is an X Factor, as you look back on last year, what would you say is your X Factor?
Well, it's a great question. And I'd love you to ask the people who work with me. I think it was ultimately, I've always wanted to be the best. Not in an arrogant, overly competitive way, but I've wanted us to be the best. And when the challenge of COVID came, like so many colleagues and friends, we were all asked to be the best at what we did and be the best of, you know, as my daughter tells me, you know, you do you and you be the best at that and I'll be happier. It's that sort of thinking, isn't it?
Did she follow that up with, and I'll do me?
Yes, of course. But time anyway. So, but you know, the point, of course, is I think the year, and the other thing too around the year was that it was a very overt opportunity for us to give back. Because we had retailers who are really struggling. Many businesses were. So we ran the State of the Nations. We ran complimentary webinars. We put all sorts of content out of the retail marketplace. And that wasn't to be lauded to help people. And you know, sure, there's a pecuniary benefit of our brand was associated with it, but more importantly, it gave us a chance to take stock and to do what we could relative to our expertise.
Look, I do think you've hit something that I do think is important, because it really does, you know, ultimately, I do think great leaders are those who are willing to be authentic about that. You know, like there is nothing to be ashamed or hide of in terms of wanting to be the best. I mean, at the end of the day, do we not all just are not here to want to be the best that we can be?
Yeah, it feels a bit weird to even say it, but when I really distill it down in the question, it actually is that. And then that means, are we the best employer we could be? Are we the best advisor? Are we the best, you know, confidant to our friends? And so it goes. And recognize too where we are, I suppose, ultimately falling short, which is the other attribute of a great leader, and that's the ability to reflect. To actually seriously reflect and to contemplate, you know, the work they're doing, their influence, are they on track? we have strategic plans and we have all that great stuff, but ultimately it's about the people's value system. So you've got competency, value system, focus, interpersonal relationships, and I include with self in that mix.
Mm.
That was deep, wasn't it?
Oh, it was very deep. So given that the reflection, as someone who is leading in your industry, right, there's no doubt that the impact you've had and your commitment to being of service to those in retail specifically, right? As you look now ahead, having reflected on, you know, because perhaps retail was one of the big ones, right, that got really washed last year. As you look towards this year, what are some of the opportunities or big ideas that you're seeing for retailers?
Well, yes, and I'll answer that by saying there's one other element of being a good leader, and I think it's optimism.
Mm.
And so, you know, optimistic by nature, the world of retailing, to your question, has changed significantly. I mean, hugely, and will continue to change exponentially. And at one level, what a wonderful time to be in the sector, because the diversity of people, of skills, of challenges and opportunities, all largely fueled by the great accelerant of technology, show us that, you know, this great change is all about helping provide a trusted set of hands in this environment, if you like. So for retailers, it's all going to be about how do they integrate this space called omnichannel, physical retail and online merging in together. How do they then prepare themselves for the next wave of the internet is everything, the 5G growth, the role of media coming in, the intersection of media, technology, retail. So how do they do all that? And this great divide appearing between buying and shopping, which I'm often quoted on. And buying, of course, will be, and we already see it, it's the growth of home deliveries. It's the growth of online, and soon enough, in time to come, it'll be your washing machine self-ordering its powder and things like that. The high growth of this commoditized channel. And then the shopping will be the great theatrical, educational, inspirational experience. And we, of course, generationally grew up with the adage of a shop on every corner. Well, that's no longer really a feasible model. So that great transformational change. And so we're part of that. And intellectually, I love it. I love the challenge. And so an Australian retail actually does turn out to be world best in many cases, at least world class in many examples of the way they go about it. So I work with, and I'm grateful for their influence.
And so what's your big game for the year? Have you set that out yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it's about continuing to build our sites perspective. It's about continuing to grow people now. We've productized that whole implementation space. We know the model works well. So now it's always going to be about growth, and it's going to be about automation of our processes as well, so that we can offer a broader range available to people through a more automated way, as well as the high touch bespoke way. And we'll have a good look at licensing as well.
Yeah. So just to wrap up then, before I do get your final views on a leader, when you say licensing, what does that look like for your business?
Oh, it's early days, but it's the ability of taking these very tried and trusted methodologies and programs and products. And we've got people in the business who do that beautifully for us now. But we own trademarks in 9 countries, for example. So at the risk of sounding megalomaniac, we'll start to have a look at what that could mean at a broader scale. And then, yeah, I think they're probably, you know, the thing is this, just concentrate on continually doing good work, adding value, having people say good things, and get a sense that you're helping people be employed, and so it goes. And so one of the sectors I get a lot of pleasure of the work we do is in the non-for-profit, for example, you know, and we'll continue to do that this year. And so I think it's going to be more of the same. largely, but just keep doing it better and better.
Yeah. Well, I think you remind me, I think when you started off talking about the power of brand, that ultimately, you know, every single action we take in the current moment is an opportunity to make sure that we're staying true to that, you know, staying true to the service and commitment that we are as a brand, right? And given the unpredictability and the uncertainty that's going to unfold, it's going to take just being that kind of present and just staying true to those things. Because if we don't stay true to those things, it's very easy to get lost when things start to kind of move so quickly.
It's, you know, it's right, Carly. In the very early days, someone would ask me something, and if I wasn't sure, I'd say I wasn't sure, but I'd make sure I went home and read about it, figured it out, and then came back to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's relevant. Knowledge, we can't expect to have every granule of knowledge that's out there, but we can expect to work with great people to do that, to deliver that.
Well, and just as any good doctor would do, right? Go to the resources and get the answer.
That's right, Chloe. That's right.
So please, I would like if you could finish this sentence for me to complete. A leader is someone who?
Oh, a leader is someone, and I was touching on this earlier, but a leader is someone who has a good sense of purpose and vision, has the ability to look from the outside in, certainly stays the course, is a little bit extraordinary, that belief system I touched on, has the X factor, and ultimately listens to the beat of the drum just a little bit differently.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking some time out to share with me today. So many remarkable things. I especially love this positioning on brand. I was very surprised, and the analogy of being a doctor in your space is absolutely perfect. It's sensational. So thanks again for joining me.
Absolute pleasure, and my compliments to you and the great work you're doing, Carly.
Thank you.